Hey, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and in this video, you'll learn how to create a customizable, flexible React button component. So we're going to get started on CodeSandbox.io, which is a developer tool in a browser that allows you to create different types of developer environments. So you can just get up and start coding without having to worry about setting everything up on your local machine. It's great for sharing code and also for tutorials because we can skip some of that setup process. So once you sign up for CodeSandbox.io, you want to come over to Create Sandbox and then come over and click on React, and it's going to create a React app for you. Now this is just a basic React app, and you can see here that we have some starter code here in our index.js file. And what I want to do is just go ahead and delete that because we don't need that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the source folder, click on this icon to create a new folder and create one called Components. And in this components folder, we're going to create a new file. And this is going to be called, this button.jsx. And we also need to create another file called button.css. And in the button.jsx file, we need to first import React. So let's go ahead and do import React from React. And let's go ahead and import the style sheet as well. And that's going to be in the same directory, button.css. So once we have that, let's go ahead and write our function down here. And first, I'm just going ahead and just export this like here in the function, so we don't have to do it at the bottom. And the name of this is going to be button. It's going to be a arrow function. And in this arrow function, we can go ahead and destructure some of the props that we're going to be passing in. That way, we don't have to access these off of props.text, props.type. We can just destructure them here in the arrow function and then just access them by their name. So the first one is going to be children. Then we're going to have a type prop, an on-click prop, a button style, and a button size. So if we save that, we can come down here and then we can return the code that we want. And this is just going to return a standard HTML button. And here in between the two tags is where we're going to access the children prop. And we're also going to set onClick equal to the onClick prop that we pass in, and the type prop is going to be set to the type prop. So let's just go ahead and save that. And now we have, our basic function here, and we can actually go ahead and use this in our index.js file. So let's actually go ahead and import this. And in between here, we can just do a standard call to action like buy now, which is our child prop. And then that is going to set the standard HTML button here with no styles. So now what we want to do is we want to figure out how we can pass in a style prop, check to see if that style even exists. And if it does, go ahead and set it to that prop name. And if it doesn't, we can set it to a fallback. So let's just go ahead and save this, come back into our button.jsx file. And the way that I'm going to do this is I want to create some constants outside of this component that are going to be an array of the available styles that we'll write in our CSS. So the first one is going to be const. I'm going to do const styles. And like I said, this is going to be equal to an array. And the first class is going to be called button -- primary -- solid. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to do this for all of my styles here for the different types of buttons that I have. So I'm just going to go ahead and speed through this so you don't have to watch this in real time. All right, so now that we have that, what we can do is we can use this array to check to see whatever prop that we pass in exists in this array. And if it does, like I said, we can set it to that value. And if it doesn't, we can set it to a fallback, which in this case is going to be our first value in our array, which is our primary solid style. Now, before we set the logic for that in our component, let's go ahead and create another constant here. And this constant is going to do essentially the same thing, but it's going to be for the sizes. And again, this is going to be an array. And this time we're just going to have two strings in here, one for button medium and one for button small. So now we have that, we now have a system where we can check to see if the values are actually legitimate before we just pass them in willy-nilly into our component. So what I'm going to do is in this button component, I'm going to create another constant. And this constant we can call something like check button style. And what we're going to do is first we're going to say, hey, we want to look into the styles array up here. And then we're going to use a method called includes. And what this is, this method's pretty self-explanatory on what it does. It essentially checks to see if the value we pass in is included in this array, this styles array. And the value that we want to check in this case is going to be the button style. And we're going to write a ternary operator here. And a ternary operator takes 3 arguments. The first one is what we want to test to see if it's either true or false. The second value is what we want to return if the value is true. And the last one is what we want to return if it is false. So if this is true, if this actually exists, that prop that we pass in, let's just go ahead and set it to that prop. So we'll set it to button style. Else, if it's not, we'll just go ahead and have a fallback here of styles and then the first item in the array. So if we save that, we now have that logic here that we can use inside this button down here in just a few seconds. But first we need to go ahead and create a new const. And I'm going to call this one check button size. And this one's going to essentially do the same thing, but look in the sizes array and see if the button size prop we pass in is included in there. And if it is, we'll just go ahead and use that prop. And if it's not, we'll just have a fallback of the first value in the array. So now that we have these two constants that have some logic here, we can go ahead and use those values down here in the class name for the button. So I'm going to do class name. And what we're going to do is a template string. So that's in order to do that, we just do a backtick. And the first class name is just going to be button, which is the standard class for this, all of the buttons. And then here is where we can have the custom classes. So in order to pass a variable into a template string, you first do a $, curly braces, and then the name of the constant or the variable. And in this case, it's going to be set button style. And the next one is going to be called set button size. So set button size. So let's go ahead and save that. And it looks like I'm getting an error here. And if I take a closer look, and I'm getting an error because for some reason my brain said set, and it should be check button size and check button style. So if we save that, now that error goes away. So now that we have this logic, we still haven't had anything styled yet because we need to write that in the button.css file. So let's go ahead and open up the button.css file. And the first thing I'm going to do is write some variables here at the top. And in order to access these variables, we can first call the root pseudo class. And then we can go ahead and name the variables and then set their values. So the way you name a variable is first by 2 dashes, the name of the variable, and then you pass in the value of the variable. And in this case, we're just going to use some different hex codes for colors. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you the first one. And just to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and copy the rest of the variables in. But feel free to use your own colors or the ones that I'm using as well. So now that we have that, the reason variables are useful is let's say, for instance, I use the danger style 20 times in my project. So instead of going through and changing it 20 times, I just change it here once, and then it's going to be reflected across my project. That's the benefit of variables like this. So now that we have the variable set, I'm going to go ahead and add the button style. And the button style is going to have a font family of Roboto and a fallback of sans serif. Now that reminds me, I actually need to go ahead and import Roboto into my my styles.css file here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up to my browser, go to fonts.google.com. I'm going to add Roboto. It's actually the first. Now, if it isn't, you just go ahead and search for it here. Add it here to your selection. Come into Customize. Make sure you have regular 400 selected. Come into the @import and then copy this @import here at the top. And then we can just go ahead and paste it at the top of our project here and save that. Now we can actually use that font family throughout our project. And the next thing I'm going to do is set a font weight here to the 400. We're going to have a border radius equal to 10 pixels, cursor equal to pointer. And we're going to add a transition here so we get a nice smooth hover animation. So we're just going to target the transform, which is what we're going to be adding to our hover pseudo class. It's going to be 0.3 seconds long, and it's going to have an ease acceleration to it. So it's going to be nice and smooth instead of a linear. And this gives us a little more of life and kinetic motion. So that's the reason we're using ease. So now that we did that, let's go ahead and set the button hover class. And I'm just going to keep this simple and just do a simple transform where we'll just move it on the y-axis. So we'll do that by translate y, and then we'll move it up -3 pixels. So remember, up on the y is technically a negative value, so that's why we have the negative value like that. So if we save that, we can actually go over here and see that this moves up. Now it's still not pretty because we haven't added any of the other styles. So let's go ahead and move on to the rest. And I just want to add a little note here so we know that this is the button colors and styles. Now beneath here, we're first going to add a button primary and then solid. And then we can just go ahead and set the values here. So background color. The background color is going to be equal to a variable. And the way we access this is writing var, parentheses, and then the name of the variable, which in this case is primary. Then we can set color. And this is going to be a variable as well. And this variable is going to be called white. And last, we want to set border to none. So let's just go ahead and save that. And you can see already that this is changed, right? Now the background's blue. And why is that? What's going on here? Well, remember the logic that we wrote here. We said, hey, if the prop that we pass in here, the button style, if it doesn't exist, go ahead and use the fallback here of the first element or the first thing in this array, which is button primary solid, which is what the class that we just wrote. Button primary solid. So that's the reason that's changed. So you can see that the fallback's working. Now to save some time, I'm not going to go through and repeat, go through step by step in real time creating these classes. I'm going to just go ahead and speed through this so you don't have to watch it in real time. All right, so once I added all those styles, you can see that I have 8 new button styles here. And I'm using the variables all across them, so it's easy to change it if I ever decide to change it in the future. Now, the next thing we need to do is, we have the styles. We need to go ahead now and pass in the button size styles as well. So just want to go ahead and add a note here and call this button sizes. And then we can add our 2 classes. And the first one is going to be button -- medium. And this is just going to add padding of 10 pixels and then 20 pixels. So this 10 pixels represents the top and bottom, and the left and right is what the second value represents. Then we're going to go ahead and just set a font size here to 18 pixels. And we can do the button small. And let's just go ahead and copy these 2 values. And we're going to change the top and bottom to 15 and this one to 30. And we can go ahead and set the font size to 20. So now you can see that this is now the size of the button medium, because just like before, because we're not passing in any props currently, it's just going to revert to the first item here in the sizes array, which is equal to the string of button medium. So if we come in and inspect this, we can see that the class on this is button, button primary solid, and then button medium. So that's the reason we are seeing a button primary solid medium button. So now that we have all the styles and logic set up, let's actually go ahead and pass in some props and actually see how this changes in real time in this button component. Now, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and make sure I add all the button or all the props here. So let's just go ahead and add the onClick. And this onClick, we can just do something generic like a console.log. So it's going to be an arrow function that says console.log, you clicked on me. So this shows you that it works. And after that, we can do, so type equals button style. All right, now here's where we can pass in the name of the style. Now let's actually just go ahead and pass in something that works. So we'll just do button -- primary -- outline. So if we save that, you can see that our component has changed. And now let's go ahead and do button size and set that to button -- small, or actually large, I think is the name of the, it should be the name of it. I think I might have messed up there. This should be button large, and then make sure that we have the logic here is correct as well. So this should be large. So it's a little typo there. And now you can see once we passed in that value that it now changes. Now, one more thing to test is just what if we pass in something that doesn't exist? Let's make sure the fallback works. So I'm just going to do some random characters here. Actually, let's just do something like that. So you can see the fallback now is back to the solid primary. And here, let's just do some random value. And we can see that it reverts back to the medium button. And there you go. Now you can see with just a couple lines of code and some simple logic, you can go ahead and create a really dynamic and flexible component in your React projects. Now, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And be sure to check out our other design and coding tutorials on our YouTube channel and on skillthrive.com. Again, I'm Hunter from Skillthrive, and I'll see you in the next video.